Ukraine will receive its first Swedish Saab Gripen fighter jets as early as next year. This was announced by President Volodymyr Zelensky. In total, Kyiv plans to purchase 150 aircraft. According to the head of the Ukrainian state, this is the first deal of such scale in the field of combat aviation, and it is a historic achievement. The Gripens will become part of Ukraine's security guarantees and will help protect the skies from Russian missiles and drones. Their sufficient range will allow Russia to be deprived of its means of terror right at the places where they are produced and launched. This was stated by Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha. He emphasized that this week marks a new stage of pressure to force Russia towards peace, and that through joint efforts with international partners, it will be possible to make the cost of continuing the war unprecedentedly high for the Kremlin.
No one in the world wants this war to continue, except for Russia. It's absurd, but this very country is currently presiding over the UN Security Council in October 2025, even though its very presence in the Security Council is illegal. Russian terror can and must be stopped through collective action, by increasing sanctions pressure, and by strengthening Ukraine's energy support and defense capabilities. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
Very soon, Ukraine will receive a new solution to counter Russian Kyivs. We're talking about a bomb hunter. It is being developed jointly with NATO, according to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Recently, in France, equipment, radar, artificial intelligence-based software, and the interceptor drone itself were tested. The effectiveness of the weapon was tested under poor weather conditions.
A simulated enemy target was identified, tracked, and locked onto by the radar equipped with an advanced sensor system. After that, thanks to the artificial intelligence-based software, the interceptor drone engaged the target along a pre-calculated trajectory. From the statement by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine.
Since the beginning of the day, 101 combat engagements have been recorded at the front. Ukrainian forces are not only holding the line, but also conducting counteroffensive operations. For example, in the Pokrovsk direction, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated one of the villages. Details of the operation, as well as the overall situation on the front line, are coming up in the report.
The Ukrainian armed forces have liberated Suketske in the Donetsk region. This village is located near Pokrovsk. The operation was carried out by units of the 82nd Separate Air Assault Bukovina Brigade. The soldiers reported that during the assault, they engaged in a fierce battle with an enemy force of more than 60 men. Most of the Russian occupiers were eliminated, some were taken prisoner, and the Ukrainian flag was raised over the settlement.
The fact that we are liberating more villages, specifically from the north, let's say, of Pokrovsk, so up on the map, means that we are actually putting an end to this Russian military adventure with their attack on Dobropilya.
The defenders of Pokrovsk note that the enemy in this direction has begun actively using kamikaze drones with artificial intelligence, which are capable of autonomously searching for and selecting targets. But Ukrainian UAV operators are finding and successfully destroying even these Russian drones.
Lower, please.
We're lower where?
There are two vehicles there.
The Russians once again tried to break through the Ukrainian defenses in Vladimirovka, near Dobropilya, in the Donetsk region. They launched an assault with 5 armored vehicles from the direction of Novotoretsk, but due to weather conditions, 3 of the vehicles got stuck in the mud. And while the troops were climbing out directly into the water, Ukrainian artillery struck the enemy's concentration. Then the vehicles were finished off by FPV crews and heavy bombers.
Today, our assault troops, with support from the Azov Corps' area of responsibility, are able to neutralize the efforts that the Russians are trying to demonstrate, specifically in the Dobropilya direction. First and foremost, we're talking about the use of a large number of reserves. Several combined arms armies are operating here, and a large Russian grouping has been formed. Accordingly, the losses have become much greater, and the enemy is even trying to carry out offensive actions in some areas. However, one of the pockets, as you know, has already been closed thanks to the defense forces. We're talking about Kucheryava Yar. The Ukrainian flag is there, the entire area has been completely cleared, the pocket has snapped shut. What happens next? Next, I think we'll see counterattacks by the defense forces.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on the Pokrovsk sector of the front, the defense forces repelled nearly half of all recorded Russian assaults on the front. The invaders also unsuccessfully attempted to break through the Ukrainian defenses in the Konstantinovsky, Alexandrovsky, and other directions.
Let's steal!
910 Russian occupiers were eliminated at the front over the past 24 hours. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia's total combat losses since the beginning of the full-scale war have already nearly reached 1,136,000 soldiers. In addition, yesterday, 4 Russian tanks, 1 armored combat vehicle, 15 artillery systems, 359 operational tactical level drones, and 80 units of Russian automotive equipment were destroyed.
One of the NATO countries will produce combat drones for Ukraine. This was stated in an interview with Ukrainian journalists by the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov. He said that the United Kingdom will first produce a test batch of 1,000 Octopus interceptor drones, after which production will be scaled up to the required quantity. 27 months in Russian captivity. Arseny Mikhailov, a serviceman of the 5th Slobozhansky Brigade, SKIF, of the National Guard of Ukraine, returned to Ukraine in June of this year. While in captivity, he was subjected to physical and psychological torture, but he did not break. Now the man is undergoing rehabilitation in Kharkiv and shares what talisman gave him strength while in captivity. Details in the report by Natalia Belokudry.
Good morning, Kharkiv. Although you can hardly call it that. We have been under shelling and combat actions against us for a whole day now. Personally, I finally got some sleep after the night shift and am ready to defend our country.
This message was recorded by Arseny Mikhailov on the morning of February 25, 2022. That same day, he joined the National Guard of Ukraine, received the rank of rifleman, chose the call sign Rudy, and together with his comrades, went to the Chuhuiv area to cover the flanks. During one of the shellings, the soldier was wounded, but soon returned to duty. He took part in the liberation of Balaklia and Kupiansk, after which he repelled the advance of the Russian army in Kremina, Luhansk region, where he was already a squad commander. In the spring of 2023, at one of the positions, the enemy broke through the defenses. Arseny heard over the radio that his team needed help and headed there.
Everything was whistling and shooting here and over there. Other positions were also being stormed, or there was a bit of fighting on the buffer, and bullets were flying like this. Yeah, it was, well, honestly terrifying. And I was like, let them, because I knew nothing would reach here. Yeah. So I thought to myself, basically, let me grab someone, damn, have them take cover behind a tree just so they can keep watch. And if anything happens, if someone comes at me, just shoot, you know. Well, something like that, just to coordinate. Yeah. No, I went alone, and because of my own mistake, I ended up being captured.
Arseny admits he traded his own freedom so that his comrades would stay alive and be released. While in captivity, he had to endure a series of interrogations during which he was mercilessly beaten.
Well, right away they handed me over for questioning. I get 2 punches and I'm already on my knees. I didn't really understand how it happened. And there, basically, it was like in a movie. So they take me to the bathroom. I'm thinking, well, now they're going to drown me. Well, I almost guessed right, except they just suffocated me with a bag. So when I managed to take a proper breath, basically they'd hit me somewhere in the ribs or the liver so that I'd exhale.
Arseny endured torture, beatings, and constant intimidation. After a year in captivity, the Russian soldiers realized that they wouldn't be able to force the Ukrainian to cooperate, neither through beatings nor manipulation.
And also when they were like sending down the last group of us so-called refusers, they sent everyone down but left me in solitary, you know, to make things more fun for me. There it was just bread, water, and food. I had to stand and not sleep. I thought they would try to put even more pressure on me. But, well, apparently they understood everything and didn't push any further.
Arseny says the hardest thing in captivity was not to lose faith that an exchange would happen and he would be able to return home. Despite all the abuse, he never doubted for a minute that people were fighting for him and the other Ukrainian prisoners. One of the symbols of that faith was an ordinary knit tank top that was sent to the colony from Ukraine.
Here is this little tank top, the one I kept. And when I wore it, yes, it was cold and all that. I understood that it didn't actually keep me warm at all, but, you know, it was pure psychosomatics just because it was from Ukraine. That's it. In its own way, with its carefully crafted trim and all, it really warmed my soul.
Arseny Mikhailov and more than 100 other defenders were returned to Ukraine during another prisoner exchange on June 14, 2025. In 2 years and 3 months in Russian captivity, Arseny lost more than 10 kilograms of weight. His asthma worsened and he couldn't breathe properly. Despite all this, the day of the exchange was one of the happiest days of his life. Ukraine! Ukraine above all. 4 months after the exchange, Senior Lieutenant Arseny Mikhailov continues his rehabilitation. He participates in CrossFit competitions and also runs marathons. He has already managed to regain his previous weight. But the main goal of getting back in shape is to return to one of the combat units of the 5th Slobozhanska Brigade Scythian, Natalia Belokudry and Andrei Domovoy from Kharkiv for Freedom TV channel.
Russian hybrid attacks in Europe pursue several objectives at once. These were outlined by the head of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, Kirilo Budanov, in an interview with the Italian newspaper Il Foglio. First and foremost, Russian drones in the skies over EU countries are testing Europeans' reactions and their willingness to use force. At the same time, they are searching for air defense systems as well as military facilities, Budanov noted. In addition, Putin is trying to destroy the image of a strong Europe in the minds of Russians.
If you look at everything together, drones, sabotage at factories and on railways, cyber attacks, we can see that the Russians' goal is to stir up anti-war sentiment in European countries and in your public opinion. For them, this is a double benefit. If you Europeans grow tired of the war, the aid coming to Ukraine will decrease. Meanwhile, the Russians are sowing the idea among European peoples that it is not worth fighting against Russia. This is not my opinion. This is the Russian perspective on the matter. Kirilo Budanov, head of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, in an interview with Il Foglio. Media.
Russia is recruiting so-called disposable spies in Europe, according to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service. Since 2022, European countries have expelled several hundred Russian intelligence officers. So now recruiters are offering ordinary citizens one-time assignments for a reward. Victoria Chistyukina will tell you more in detail.
Russian intelligence agencies have stepped up the recruitment of residents of European countries. The highest number of such cases has been recorded in Poland and the Baltic states. 130 people in 12 European countries are suspected of working for Russia. Realizing the inevitability of their agents' failure, Moscow prefers to use so-called disposable spies. Their goal is to gather information and undermine European stability.
Russian recruiters actively use the internet, social networks, church communities, sports clubs, and mass events to find potential operatives. Such people are usually recruited only once to obtain information or carry out specific tasks in the interests of the aggressor. This is part of the Kremlin's hybrid strategy aimed at undermining the security of European countries. From a statement on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine,
Moscow was forced to resort to such risky and unreliable methods after its spy network in Europe was thoroughly dismantled. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, European intelligence services have expelled around 700 agents who were operating under the cover of Russian diplomatic missions.
the largest purges took place in Bulgaria, where 82 representatives of Russian diplomatic institutions were declared persona non grata. Germany expelled 65 people, Poland 58, Romania 52, Slovakia 39, and both the Netherlands and Slovenia 34 each. From a statement on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine,
Russia is ramping up its hybrid activities in Europe, and Moscow may initiate a military conflict against NATO and the European Union in the coming years, according to Martin Jaeger, head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service.
The hybrid methods that Russia uses to achieve this goal have become a widespread phenomenon. The frequency of such incidents represents a new level of confrontation, a standoff in which Russia regards us as an adversary and in fact as a warring party. Despite attempts to conceal its true intentions, Moscow is actually seeking to test the strength of our borders. At best, Europe will maintain a cold peace which at any moment could escalate into a hot confrontation. We must be prepared for a further escalation of the situation. Martin Jaeger, head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, in a comment to Bloomberg.
Hidden and direct attacks by Russian special services are being recorded in Europe with increasing frequency. Analysts are convinced that Russia is already preparing for a possible war with NATO.
ongoing Russian sabotage activities and reconnaissance operations by Russian drones against military bases and critical infrastructure in Europe indicate that Russia has already entered the zero phase of its campaign to prepare for a possible war with NATO. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War,
to prevent further escalation, the alliance must limit Russia's ability to threaten Europe, the head of Germany's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is convinced.
we must always remember that Russia is interested not only in Ukraine. Russian aggression is directed against all of Europe and NATO. We hear this from Moscow quite often, and we are increasingly seeing how Russia is testing NATO's resolve. To prevent further escalation of Putin's extremely dangerous game, we must continue to limit his ability to threaten us. This includes depleting Russia's military budget.
Russia uses any means to destabilize Europe. Recently, Polish border guards discovered an underground passage beneath the Polish-Belarusian border. The tunnel started in Belarus and ended on the Polish side about 20 meters from the demarcation line. According to Euronews, this is the second tunnel discovered this year on the border section between the two countries. The first was found in the area of the border outpost in Suketske. It is likely that these structures are intended to help saboteurs and migrants cross from Belarus into Poland. Since January 2025, Polish border service officers have documented more than 26,000 attempts at illegal border crossings. Victoria Chistiukina for Freedom TV channel.
Donald Trump is embarking on a major tour of Asia. On October 30th, the American president will meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The agenda will also include Russia's war against Ukraine. Trump will also try to influence China to stop purchasing Russian oil.
One of the topics we will discuss is Russia and Ukraine. The US has imposed large-scale sanctions against Russia and would like Beijing to help increase international pressure on Moscow. We have things to discuss with Chairman Xi, and he has things to discuss with us as well. I think we're in for a good meeting.
Shares of Russia's largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft, have dropped significantly amid US sanctions. According to the stock exchange, over 2 days, the combined market capitalization of both companies has dropped by more than 400 billion rubles. Rosneft shares have fallen by 3%. Lukoil's assets have plummeted even more, by 7%. This has resulted in losses of more than $3.5 billion. At the same time, experts note that the problems are only just beginning. Rosneft and Lukoil may lose their counterparties and their positions in foreign markets. India will almost completely stop importing Russian oil, Bloomberg reports. This decision was made after the United States imposed new restrictions against Rosneft and Lukoil. The heads of leading Indian refineries have already stated that the latest sanctions from Washington have effectively made it impossible to continue purchases. Details in the report.
Following Chinese companies, which suspended purchases of Russian oil after sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, Indian refineries are making a similar decision. The Indian corporation Reliance Industries has begun actively purchasing oil from Middle Eastern countries and the United States, Bloomberg reports. The company has acquired several grades of oil from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, and the United States. Deliveries are scheduled for December and January.
A representative of Reliance stated that the company is currently assessing the impact of various sanctions on Russian oil flows and the export of petroleum products to Europe. The company representative said that oil supply contracts will be adjusted in response to changes in market and regulatory conditions, from a Bloomberg publication.
Until recently, Reliance remained the largest importer of Russian oil in India, receiving crude under a long-term contract with Rosneft. However, after the imposition of sanctions, the company has been forced to look for new sources of supply. According to sources, in October, Reliance purchased at least 10 million barrels of oil on the spot market, mostly Middle Eastern grades. Most of these deals were made after the U.S. restrictions were imposed.
The role of the shadow fleet is increasing, and it is being increasingly financed by the Russian Federation. In fact, for the oil that is shipped to India, ships for the shadow fleet are being bought at the ship graveyard in India. These are old vessels that are still operating at sea and in the Mediterranean. Nevertheless, they deliver Russian oil, which is also regularly supplied to Chinese ports. It is also delivered to the ports of New Delhi.
Since 2022, India has become the largest buyer of Russian oil transported by sea at a discount. It imported about 1,700,000 barrels per day over the course of 9 months in 2025. Analysts note that, against the backdrop of new sanctions, the flow of Russian oil to India may sharply decrease, except for supplies to Nayara Energy, which is partially controlled by Rosneft. At the same time, demand for Middle Eastern grades of oil is growing, which has already led to an increase in their prices. In October, India already reduced its imports of Russian crude by 50% after negotiations with the United States. Washington had been pressuring India for several months to abandon Russian oil.
Currently, there are 4 major oil refineries operating in India that are under the control of the Russian Federation. And at these enterprises, 62% are controlled by companies owned by Gazprom and the Russian Federation. But today, the United States is taking major steps to ensure that Russian oil does not enter the pipelines.
Russia is already experiencing a gasoline shortage in many regions. The Federation is on the verge of an energy collapse. The Serbian oil company NIS, which is 55% owned by Gazprom and Gazprom Neft, may have to shut down the country's only oil refinery within a week, Reuters reports, citing sources familiar with the situation. Earlier, due to American sanctions, the Croatian operator Janaf, which manages the only oil pipeline supplying Serbia, ceased working with NIS. The Gazprom subsidiary supplies 80% of Serbia's gasoline and diesel needs and more than 90% of its aviation kerosene and fuel oil.
To resolve the crisis, representatives of Gazprom Neft, Alexander Dukov, and Russian Deputy Minister of Energy Pavel Sorokin flew to Serbia in mid-October. According to Večernje Novosti, Serbia proposed to buy out the Russian stake in NIS in order to remove the plant from under the sanctions. The Russian side refused and stated that they would prefer to see a different buyer, for example, the United States, according to the publication's sources. From an article in the Moscow Times.
After the American leader increased pressure on Putin, the U.S. Senate wants to vote on a bill for large-scale sanctions against Russia. Donald Trump himself believes that the impact of American restrictions on Moscow can be assessed in 6 months. At the same time, the European Union has also adopted the 19th package of sanctions against the Russian Federation. Starting from January 1, 2027, a phased ban on the import of Russian LNG will come into effect. In addition, another 117 vessels have been added to the list of shadow fleet ships used to circumvent oil restrictions. Now their total number has reached 558. Victoria Chistyukhina for Freedom TV channel.